A Nascent Kaleidoscope. Chapter 1. I was in the middle of class when I couldn't help but just stare at the ceiling. People talking around me. I heard my teacher lecture about something irrelevant, but my mind was completely unfocused. Even as everyone got up and left, I was still stuck in a daze. It felt like I had foreign thoughts in my head. I don't know when it started, sometime recently, but I would catch myself thinking of something I had no idea about, in too vivid a recollection to think them mere daydreams. Was I going crazy? I knew what schizophrenia was, but didn't that come on gradually, not just out of the blue? Maybe I took some really bad drugs, without knowing? I know I haven't been sleeping well, but it's not like I've missed out on that much sleep. Weird things just kept popping into my head. What did vampires have to do with anything? And it didn't stop there. Why did an image of a red moon keep showing up as well? Shimoda-san. My thoughts were broken as I heard someone call my name, only for my expression to darken as I saw the person. Kaicho. I answered automatically. Sauna Shirtorai, the student council president. She basically ran the school, and everyone knew it. Hell, there were times when she could convince the principal of certain matters. There were rumors that her parents actually owned the entire thing. But why did something about her suddenly feel off? I just ignored the funny feeling I had in the back of my head and pushed down all these strange images that sprang up. I need to speak with you, Shimoda-san. Please follow me to my office. With a sigh, I gestured for her to lead the way. I don't really know what this about, but generally people don't like being called to her office. It wasn't exactly far, but for some reason I felt a bit of unease with every step I took, though that could be attributed to my current mental state. Please have a seat, Shimoda-san. She gestured. I could only blink as I realized we were already standing in the student council office, and I didn't even notice another member to the side going through some stacks of paper, and a chessboard off to the side that caught my eye. I just feel completely disconnected from myself right now. What exactly? We need to talk about your school trip application. She cut me off, and I could only just shut my mouth at her authoritative tone. My school trip application? Oh, yeah, the drama club was going to Kyoto to see a play with the proceeds we earned the past couple of years from various school plays we put on. That was next week, I think. Sounds about right. Your guardian did not give permission for you to attend. Pardon? I blurted out. I contacted your guardian after you submitted your application, as you are a special case and permission was not granted. I'm afraid you will not be permitted to attend. She said plainly. Wait, what? There was a lot to digest there, but I started with the most obvious question. What do you mean, my guardian? I had a strange feeling bubbling in my chest. I hadn't met my guardian in the years I lived in this shitty town. The one who enrolled you in the school, we contacted him, and he revoked your application. She once again said it as a matter of fact. Who? Excuse me. Who is my guardian? I pressed. That is private information. I'm afraid I can't divulge. She replied. You can't divulge to me my guardian's information. That sounds like bullshit. Shimoda-san, I advise you to watch your language. She narrowed her eyes. Regardless, you will not be attending the Kyoto trip with your club. As the vice director of the drama club, you're not allowing me to go. The decision is not mine. My hands are tied. I'm sorry, Shimoda-san. Her reply didn't sound very convincing. Whatever. I spit out, gritting my teeth and balling my fists. I spent a lot of time with my club working hard to raise the money for this trip, and suddenly it was all shot to hell. Shimoda-san. I didn't want to hear anymore. I didn't want to lose my temper, so I just got up and left. Thankfully, the school day was over, so I didn't have to sit around here anymore. I was supposed to go to my club after class, but fuck it. I'm in no mood nor mental state to deal with any of this right now. I just grabbed my stuff and headed home. I was angry, even as I walked through the door and threw my stuff on the table. I wasn't worried as I let out a shout of frustration. It's not like anyone was here to scold me. All alone in this empty house. I had a caretaker that would come every once in a while. I think it's been about a month since her last visit, where she merely walked inside, took note of things, and made sure I was still living before leaving again. The contemptuous gaze she always gave me was very memorable. I was under the assumption that she worked for my father, my illustrious guardian that Sauna mentioned earlier. That fact that she dressed as a maid gave that theory more credence. After my mother passed away, I was suddenly whisked away here and set up with a living place, and my needs taken care of. I don't even have a name to go with his non-existent face. I've never met the man, nor do I have even the inkling to anymore. Fuck him. He wasn't there when Mother was passing. He doesn't get to be a part of my life. Hence tied my ass. I was looking forward to that trip for a long time. I love the theater. It was one of the few things my mother and I did together as a child. We weren't exactly wealthy, but any stretch of the imagination, money was extremely tight, so she would often find some activities that were cheap or free. Finding theater groups that had free admission was something we did several times. No, her hands are tied unless you're a pervert with a dragon in his soul. The idiot and his friends literally break not just school rules but the fucking law, yet she sweeps it all away. Hell, most the school thinks him, and his group are blackmailing her in some way, even if that is a load of bollocks. Fuck off, Citri. I just snorted at her voice, still echoing in my mind again. Wait, what? Where did that come from? A dragon. And her name is Shurtorai. I just sat down, rubbing my temples in confusion. Fuck me. I am not in good shape at the moment. Where is all this nonsense coming from? I leaned back in the chair I found myself in, staring at the ceiling again. It was easier to focus on my anger than on anything else. I didn't even want to go to Kuo Academy. Stupid acceptation letter came after I was denied at another school in the next town over. Kuo Academy was one of the most exclusive private schools in the prefect, but I had my eyes set elsewhere. Now that I think about it, why wasn't I accepted where I wanted? Kuo Academy is objectively better, but it hasn't been a co-ed school for long, which is why I didn't want to go there. I didn't know if there would be any weird favoritisms towards the female population. Considering I got into the better school, why wasn't I considered for the others? I sent out several applications, but all of them were denied. No. It started to make sense now. So this wasn't the first time. I took a deep breath to calm myself. Why wasn't I allowed to go to Kyoto? Why was I forced to attend Kuo? Why is a father, I don't know, forcing me to stay here? What else was being manipulated about my life from behind my back? What else don't I know? I refuse to follow your plans. I can't go to school I choose. You won't let me even leave the town. Fuck it, I quit. Do something about that, you asshole. Trying to control my life after being absent for 18 years. Good riddance. I felt the need to get away. Something about this house was suddenly very stifling. Without even thinking, I stormed out the front door and hurriedly made my way down the street, not even bothering to take note of the direction I went. Even as the sky turned dark, I kept moving my feet. I don't really know where I was. It's not like I memorized the entire layout of Kuo. It was a rather large town. But as I kept going, I got strangely drawn to something. It was a feeling that was nostalgic, but also somewhat foreign. A few turns down an alley, and I came upon a scene that was hard to describe. The hell? I heard a shout from a white-haired man, a foreigner. He was standing over the corpse of I don't know how to describe it, a monster? He turned to look at me. How the fuck did a normie get past my barrier? The thing on the ground started to squirm, and without even taking his eyes away from me, he held up a weird-looking gun and shot it a few times in the head. I couldn't help but take a step back as he eyed me viciously. I don't know what surprised me more, the fact that he was carrying a real gun, or the fact that the corpse of the monster started glowing from the shots and began decomposing at an alarming rate. He rubbed his gun against his head. I don't really feel on my A-game tonight. Usually I got a bunch of one-liners ready, but I don't really go out of my way to kill normies. He shrugged, and after a blink, he was no longer standing a few dozen yards in front of me, but was at my side and a buzzing sound next to my ear. Is that a fucking lightsaber? I know what you're thinking. Is this a fucking lightsaber? Wait, what? And the answer is a bit of a letdown. Just know that George Lucas is one litigious motherfucker. And now, he stopped, the lightsaber pushed against my skin slightly, and I felt an almost unbearable pain permeate my body. And just like that, Father Freed is reeling to go for round 2. I couldn't hear him. I fell to the ground, clutching the small wound on my neck. The pain left quickly, but the after-effects left me almost breathless. Was I screaming for a few moments there? I couldn't even focus properly. Whatever that lightsaber did messed me up. Thought you were some fucking normie, but looks like you some devil bitch. My night just got a lot fucking better. The other bastard stray didn't even say anything when I cut it up, just screamed like a cunt, but you look all put together still. He smiled wide, clearly out of his mind. I heard what he said, but it basically passed through one ear and out the other. I only had one thought in my mind. Was I going to die? He started swinging his sword all over the place, cutting up a nearby wall and looking at me with his strange smile. I don't want to die. As a sword of light hovered above me, I felt something indescribable. It was like a dam in my head that had been slowly leaking had collapsed. I let out a scream I had been holding in, clutching my head. The world around me seemed to disappear. The only thing left were a multitude of colors that I could only describe as a kaleidoscope. Chapter 2. As the cascading colors faded from my vision, I noticed the familiar ceiling of my home. Even without getting up, my hands started to roam my body, making sure I was still in one piece. There was light peeking through the windows already. Had I fallen asleep? Was it all a dream? I brought my hand up to my neck, where there was a faint burning sensation. My stomach dropped as I realized where it was from. Memories of a previous self had flooded my mind. There was no thunderous awakening. The heavens didn't part to bestow this enlightenment upon me. There were no earth-shattering effects that came with my newfound wisdom. I simply remembered a life before this one. Last night, the high-stress situation was more or less a catalyst. A lot of questions I had previously were now answered. Standing up and looking in the mirror, I couldn't help but run my hand through my hair. My red hair that I inherited from my father. I do truly look like him. I touched my neck again. There was no scar, but the phantom sensation was still there. Holy power, practically poison to my kind. I'll need to be careful in future. Who even am I? My feeling towards my father didn't change, even after knowing who he was now. These newfound memories, I could close my eyes and see the progression of this world line. Secrets became my domain. I now knew things I couldn't possibly have known previously. I stretched my back slightly and felt something I hadn't in 18 years of my life. 2 bat-like wings exploded out behind me. What a refreshing feeling. Wings, how comical. They in no way allowed for the physical sensation of flight. They were almost frail-like in their aesthetic, but their power didn't come from their manifestation. They were more conceptual in nature than physical. I have wings, therefore I can fly. It's the same with angels, and a lot of other races that have wings. Shifting through my memories, and there were quite a bit to look at. I was apparently a half-devil. It explained why I was just now realizing I had wings in the first place, even though normal devils come into them as children. They were magical, and previously I had such a pitiable amount of magic, be it magical energy, or the devil's equivalent of demonic energy, that they simply couldn't manifest. Was it perhaps because of my magic circuits? No magical energy would leak out from my being because of a pseudo-magical organ, so I was thought of as almost a cripple. I sat down and hummed to myself for a moment. Half-devils in general were looked down on. They usually got the short end of the stick when compared to normal devils. Considering most half-devils came from a human parent, they usually inherited the talent, or rather the lack thereof, from them. No noticeable activation of my bloodline, nor magical energy on the surface. I guess there was no surprise that I was tossed to the side. Even as I rationalized my situation, it didn't abate my anger. Maybe if they dug any deeper, they would have discovered my magic circuits? No, it didn't matter. They chose to not be a part of my life, so I don't care about that side of my family. I've been alone for a while now. I'll just keep trudging on as I am. Though I was curious about my bloodline, even as I tried, I couldn't find anything but the tiniest speck of the exalted power of destruction that my bloodline boasts about. I couldn't even bring it to the surface. What a shame. It would have been a wonderful boon. It made my feel just ever so much weaker. I was almost killed by a psycho-exorcist. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. I was lucky I activated my magic out of habit. I've lived in this house enough that I was able to overturn space and pop into my bedroom on pure instinct using the kaleidoscope. I feel so weak, and I hate it. It went beyond just almost being killed like that. I was pushing away my anxiety about almost dying, but there was more to it. I didn't feel in control of my life. I hated it. I didn't want to be this me anymore. Takao Shimoda, that was my name. The name my mother gave to me, but I couldn't be this person anymore. Even as I thought my own name, it seems like the older memories were taking precedence. Family names come first in Japanese society, and I was starting to think in Western terms. How strange. I didn't even notice until now. Not only that, if I recall correctly, devils can speak and understand any language fluently, was that also having an impact on my mental state? Those racial abilities should be blooming now. Small victories and all that. I looked myself over in the mirror one more time, letting my wings disappear. Sorry, Mom, I can't be this anymore. I quietly apologized. I wanted a new name for a new beginning. I would take a page out of my previous self's book. Who was I now? Wilhelm Henry Schweinorg. As I name myself, my name defines me. This is who I would be from now on. The powerless boy I was previously is gone. Looking at the morning sun, my thoughts drifted back from the more whimsical ideas. What was I going to do in the immediate time frame? Hell, what even time was it right now? I moved my hands around my pockets and couldn't even find my phone. Did I seriously leave my house last night without my phone? I don't know what I was thinking. Well, I wasn't in my right mind if I were to be honest. I think a lot of stuff just all came boiling to the surface, and I had a small episode. Having more context to look at my life now, I wouldn't get so caught up in myself like previously. Going downstairs, it was sitting on the table. Oof. School started an hour ago, whatever. I'm done with that nonsense anyways. My attitude didn't change much. I still didn't care to go back under the thumb of people I don't like. Sona Citri. She was probably just following orders from her sister or my father. Still, fuck them. What to do. I need some things to get started. My circuits weren't even properly open yet. Only a few were forced to activate last night, which allowed me to run away. I need materials, But right now I am limited. I don't possess my favored mystic code. My jeweled sword, the beauty that went into its creation. How dearly do I miss it right now. It helped me channel the infinite power that I could draw from parallel worlds. It was an amazing tool to overcome many of the limitations that magic circuits imposed. Not to mention, it did a lot of the heavy lifting with calculations. Despite what people may think, I can't just rip open a portal and jump from one world line to the next. Last night was a fluke that I doubt I could do consciously without prior preparations. Having to calculate the trajectory of the planet in relation to the stars to determine a fixed point in space, while also considering both the Y and Z axis. That was barely even scratching the surface. My beautiful old sword could do that in moments. Blah. Now though, I would have to rely on the meager amount of mana I can channel myself and do all the calculations by hand, lest I overstep my own bodily means and accidentally kill myself. But I can manage until I find some materials to craft myself something capable of synergizing with my magic. I have no delusions about making something on the same level as my old sword. I would need to find my way back to my previous dimension to even begin that endeavor. No, I would just need something to propel me over the limitations of my current body. I have some meager funds available, an allowance provided by my caretakers. A good plan of action, but there was one important question that needed answering before I departed. What exactly do I wear? I seemed to inherit my previous self's tastes in fashion, and I couldn't help but cringe at my current attire. I wasn't even sure I had any clothing that could meet my standards, and I lacked the funds to properly address my current grievances. Regardless, I did my best to uplift my normal dress to something that passes as reasonable. Now where to go? Someone my age may just dart right towards the nearest shopping center, but my current needs require something a bit more unique. Perhaps there is one boon for living this far east. The residents of this country place a bit more truth into the old ways. That is to say, they have a healthy appreciation for legends, myths, and traditions. Even in a more modern town like this, there are places that sell the stranger variety of goods. I could vaguely recall a district that had things like antique shops and traditional medicines. That would be as good a place as any to begin. On the eastern side of town, where more shops and stalls pop up, usually the stranger side of commerce appears here. Not to say that I found some mystical treasure trove. The vast majority of things here are knickknacks or scams. It was like a tourist trap without the touristy part. I could see hawkers trying to sell their miracle cures that came from various animal body parts. Or people shouted on the corners about warding away evil spirits with such and such charms. Though there was one truth about this area that made me feel relaxed. I could feel some mystical elements in the air, perhaps not any blatant displays, but more the presence of thicker mana. More mystery, if that is even an applicable term for this world line. Though contextually speaking it should be about the same regardless. Even with the high concentration of magical energy that permeates this world, such things were easy to sense when you were close. My eyes darted around. A content smile plastered my face as I noticed many things I had to stop myself from impulse buying. A few gems hidden among the trash in the area, but nothing that would immediately help my circumstances. I had a decent amount of pocket change readily available, an amount I had saved up over the course of a decade or so. If my math was correct, it should be about 347 pounds, or roughly 37,000 yen. My mind still defaults to pounds, the years spent in London taking precedence. I wonder if that nifty little food card is present in this world? I usually visited it every time I returned to the clock tower, only being a few minutes' walk from the entrance. Thoughts for later. My eye caught a nice little prize in the corner, a woman selling various ginseng. I looked over a handful of them, admiring the health and age. Thankfully, I had a couple circuits open, enough to cast a few minor cantrips such as structural analysis. While I couldn't immediately know all the information of what I was looking at, I could more or less estimate the age of these herbs within a couple decades. Most were less than 20 years old, but one stood out. The woman didn't even bat an eye as I picked it out of the basket. She clearly didn't know its worth. She probably thought I was a sucker, but I kept a straight face as I paid a decent price. 100 years or so ginseng was worth its weight in gold or more. Those years of learning Eastern magics was paying off already. There were several concoctions I could brew that would help forage my body with readily available ingredients, and older ginseng being the hardest to procure. Even those old stuffy magi in the tower knew that a healthy mind resides in a healthy body. While my body wasn't exactly in bad condition, I was a bit of a shut-in teenager. I could stand to be in better physical shape. A good find regardless, and something that probably made this trip worth it. Wandering around a fair bit more, I stumbled upon an antique shop. A creaky door met a small bell at the top to alert the owner that I entered. He only gave me an inquisitive eye as I nodded in his direction. I suppose a young man would be a rare sight for his shop, especially this time of day. I'm glad I took the effort to all tease appear somewhat well-kept as opposed to a normal student. In that small exchange, I didn't sense any magical capabilities from him, something easy to discover with a little flaring of mana in the immediate vicinity. That being said, I could immediately sense several objects in the shop pulse with slight waves of magical energy as I did so. My eyes drawn to an old revolver inside a case. This thing was extremely out of place. Besides being a gun in Japan, it had a very strange design and what looked like Aztec, Mayan, sigils carved into it. There didn't appear to be a way to even dislodge the chamber to add bullets. No wonder he was able to put it on display. My attempts to structural grasp it was met with resistance. Some kind of anti-scrying spells attached on. The magic of this world was much more ambiguous. Attaching an anti-scrying concept probably fought against my spell as it did something similar. I could probably brute force through the protections, but I had no idea what the outcome would be. But, regardless, I want it. If nothing else, my curiosity was piqued. Unfortunately, the price tag was a bit too steep for me. 85,000 yen. Sad day when my funds were so minuscule. There were some other odd items. A hair clip that protected against the weather. A goblet that would gradually duplicate mundane liquids over time if supplied with a steady stream of mana. A what? Who would make something like this? I stared at the strange object before remembering what world I lived in. The age and accessibility of magic had suddenly hit me, a bit of culture shock. A butter knife that can't cut anything. Just why? Probably a learning instrument for mystic codecraft, or even a gag gift. I was leaning towards the latter after observing its makeup. It was a bit too expertly made to be an apprentice's work. How wasteful, even if its outward design was beautifully done. Something like this would never be created back home. I could only sigh in resignation at how easy the magic users of this world had it. Well, technically, I am now one of their number, if a bit constrained by my circuits. I quickly pushed the knife out of my mind, lest I lament more than I already have. My eyes finally landed on a new prize. A hat and cane combo. The price tag made me frown. 20,000 yen for both. I noticed their quality immediately, Victorian era, and made with sterner materials than what laid on the surface. The price was worth it from what I gleaned from the items, not to mention they fit my tastes. See anything that caught your eye? I snapped out of my thoughts as the owner stood next to me. Yes, I'm curious about this cane and hat. The older man just nodded, picking them up to inspect them. If I recall correctly, they were owned by an old stage magician who moonlit as a thief back in London, England, roughly 200 years ago. I mentally nodded. That was about the time frame I concluded. Anything interesting about the original owner? The man looked thoughtful for a moment. Supposedly, the magician got caught after robbing a museum and stealing a rather priceless gem, but when the authorities caught him, the gem was nowhere to be found. I reached my hand over and ran my finder along the cane, pulsing a little bit of mana and casting a minor alteration. Unfortunately, it seems as though the cane has become rusted. The old man raises an eyebrow and picks up the old item, desperately trying to pull the pieces apart. I held back a small smile. It wasn't just a cane, it was a cane sword. I slightly altered the mechanism to stop it from pulling out. So it seems. The shopkeep gave up and set it down. I don't mind getting it fixed later, so how about 18,000 yen for the pair? I inquired. Very well, I'll ring you up at the counter. Maybe I should feel bad about cheating the man out of a couple thousand yen? I still think I gave a reasonable price, all things considered, and I was taking a couple of magically imbued items off his hands. Truthfully, I'm doing him a favor in case anyone else discovered what was hidden in these little beauties. My funds were drastically low at this point. The little bit I saved in my bartering had allowed me to procure a few more necessities without becoming destitute. The market from before had almost everything that skirted what was considered mundane. I only had to spend a couple hours to find everything else within my price range. I had to make a few alterations to my concoctions I was going to brew due to availability, but overall, it should turn out all right. I was a bit giddy at my finds. Arriving home and placing my items on the counter, I removed the ingredients first. My lovely ginseng, I set aside carefully, along with some other ingredients. Strangely enough, what stood out the most was the small container of blueberries. For some reason, the recipe called for something that the taker dislikes. Not the exact wording, but that's the gist of it, and I never bothered to experiment enough with these things. They were rather finicky, as it were. Cutting everything up, throwing it into the blender. I couldn't help but stop and appreciate modern conveniences. I left a little bit of the ginseng to the side, to use in another formula to help awaken the remainder of my circuits. Lastly, I added a bit of my own blood to bring it all together and invoke the inherent mysteries within my little potion. Yes, an old recipe from China, I believe. If I recall correctly, it was rather common for cultivators back in the day, something to start them on their paths of cultivation. It clears the body of impurities and jumpstarts certain physical growths that help build muscles and such. The only reason it wasn't more widely used was because Western and Eastern magical arts weren't compatible, at least in my old world, and I had no time to research here. If I had already embarked on the path of magecraft to a certain extent and tried this, it most likely wouldn't have worked. Technically, this body was still immature in the mystical side of the world, even considering the couple circuits that opened the other day. It tasted awful as it was supposed to. Something philosophical about not liking the taste. Well, regardless, I moved on to my next little project. The concoction would work its way through my body, and I should see results when I wake up in the morning. For now, though, I stare at the two items that cost me the majority of my funds. I pick up the cane, undoing my slight alteration and withdrawing the blade hidden within. Marvelous. The weapon was of much higher quality than what one could see on the surface. It looked like ordinary steel in its making, but a quick grasp of its structure showed quite a bit of silver went into its forging. Not only that, but it was also not a mundane weapon either, as there were a few runes carved at its base. Nothing too fancy. I could easily deduce their purpose to strengthen the sword. Were they Celtic in origin? Almost like a primitive reinforcement. It would be perfect for my purposes in creating a temporary mystic code. The hat had surprised me when I first saw it. It looked completely mundane at first glance, but that was far from the truth. Who would ever suspect that this little accessory had a small pocket dimension attached to it? Flaring my couple circuits, I reached inside as my arm disappeared into its depths to withdraw what was hidden within. I couldn't help my eyes widening as I practically dumped the contents onto the table. First off, there were several bundles of paper. old bills from the era that probably weren't worth much, especially this far east. A few pieces of jewelry that I could easily find uses for. And finally, a large gem that could fit into my palm and haphazardly fallen down with everything else. Its ghastly green reflecting my wide smile. Wonderful, but I will need some way to sell this thing off without attracting attention. Chapter 3. All of this was coming together nicely, but I noticed something immediately as I started working. There were gaping holes in my combat ability. I wasn't nearly at the level of my previous self. I couldn't just ether cannon the moon back into orbit, nor do I have the millennium's worth of experience to go with my knowledge that was pouring in. Where do I go from here? I will need to begin my calculations if I truly wanted to utilize the kaleidoscope, but some of them need to be done at night when I can see the stars. Runecraft, perhaps? Knowledge is half the battle with that bit of magecraft. I always did have a fondness for the runic arts. Makes me wish I followed up on some of those rumors regarding primordial runes, but it seemed like I was always busy with one project or another. Missed opportunities, but now I have a chance to do some different things. Perhaps even look into words of power of other cultures. Egyptian hieroglyphics, Mayan and Aztec symbols, Old Hebrew script, even Japanese kanji carries mysteries within if you know where to look. I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's just settle on basic runecraft to supplement my abilities at the moment. I knew runes. I knew their identities, their definitions, their meanings, but it was a bit more than that. One of the largest aspects of runecraft was interpretation. Knowledge, understanding, and interpretation. Those three were the foundation of any rune master. Runes were both extremely narrow and unbelievably broad in what they can do. A single rune can only do so much, but with runic sentences, a simple string of 3 runes could have thousands of different effects. One needed a good amount of imagination to innovate in the field. That's the main aspect of where interpretation comes in. A strength rune on the surface may seem obvious, to strengthen something, but does that only mean physically? Are there not mental strengths? Could the same thing not apply to one's emotional strength? Runes also had a lot of weight behind them, being an art that was passed down from Odin, even if the modern version is but a hollow shell in comparison. That being said, the current world I found myself in could allow me to bridge the gap, seeing as God still walked the earth. Well, a path was settled on. There was no point in any more mental debate. I was lacking time, as it were, and putting it off merely another day might be unwise. Though a few wayward thoughts did flash across my mind, I hurriedly made my way to the study, a room I rarely used. I had once gone through its contents, and if I remembered correctly... there is it! In one of the cabinets, a calligraphy set. It came with a container of high-quality ink and paper to test a theory of mine with. I made my way back to the kitchen. Picking up the knife I had used earlier, I began to cut my palm to draw out a portion of my own blood. Once I had gathered a sufficient amount, I had dumped in the ink, mixing it quite thoroughly. Nodding to myself, I made use of the higher-quality paper, and before I started writing, I made sure to make a small prayer. It was an important aspect, to borrow the power of a mythological figure and imbue it into the ink. My magical energy acting as a conduit between the power of the entity and the paper. I did study Eastern magics in my previous life. My intent was just to understand its broad applications without truly delving into its unique mysteries. So, if my studies were indeed correct, there we go. Finishing up my delicate writing, I held up the thick piece of paper and injected my mana into it once again. It had begun to hum with certain property that any magic user would recognize. An Ofuta talisman. Basically, a one-use mystic code. There was a certain sense of satisfaction that flowed through my body. The value of this talisman was negligible at best, but it was the fact that I made it. A branch of magecraft that the previous me had never delved into, merely touching on the surface for references in his other research. It was a system, reminiscent of the church, able to call upon miracles and the holy power of heaven. The entities I called upon weren't actually paying any attention. It was a drop of water in a vast ocean for them. It was a good thing that the Shinto faction apparently didn't discriminate against devils. I hurriedly took the remainder of my materials and began to draw out more talismans. While I was anxious to finish them all in my excitement, I made sure to be gentle and precise with each stroke of my brush. Before I knew it, I had a stack of talismans sitting on the table, and the sun had already disappeared from the sky. I fiddled through the stack of 17 talismans that were now on my table before finally gathering them up and putting them inside my storage space. In the future, I'll need to tweak it a bit so I can draw things without having to reach inside the hat. Or I'll find a better means of storage, maybe like a ring or something where I can just swipe my hand. Realizing how badly I got sidetracked, I put the talisman supplies to the side. It was another direction that would synergize well with runecraft, but I need to test other things for now. There was still so much I had to do. Even with this little bit of progress, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of anxiety. With a sigh, I flipped my hand through the air, a trail of mana in its wake, as symbols began to form in the air. What separates a novice from a practitioner in runecraft? The ability to draw runes in the air. I mumbled the words, verbatim from the time I had learned the runic crafts in my past life. The memories were a bit vague, but I could somewhat recall earning a favor from one of the Frogga clan scions and used it for some lessons. Not that I learned any secret information, it was more so that I was taught their own personal thoughts and understandings based on their long history. I stared at the several floating figures in the air. It would only require a thought to invoke the suspended mysteries that were in front of me. Unfortunately, I was still in my home and didn't wish to blow a hole in the house. With another wave of my hand, the runes were dismissed, dissipating back into mana and returning to the world. The next step would be creating my own spells within the runic systems. There was a step between this and being able to draw them in the air, but I could already do that in my sleep. Being able to augment myself through the application of runes. The basics are similar to reinforcement to a degree. There is a limit to how much the body can handle without exploding. The benefit is that runic enhancement operates on a different paradigm than the reinforcement spell. It was one of the reasons why the Frogga clan often produced such terrifying enforcers. While most magi looked down on the runic arts, they couldn't argue the effectiveness in battle. It's a shame that they only cared about research results, not battle capability. By now, I was already going off on a mental tangent, and I needed to stay focused. While I was dreading what was coming next, it couldn't be put off any longer lest my procrastination overtakes me. Acquiring a marker from my room, I look around the kitchen. I would need a lot of space to figure this out. At least I won't have to do this too often. Once I finalize my mystic code, it will be able to calculate these things without my direct input. I began to write across the walls. Mathematical formulas and figures started to cover the kitchen space. I was looking at a long night ahead of me. I had already decided to forego school tomorrow anyways. I will be able to sleep in at my leisure. I woke up in perhaps the most disgusting way. The smell that permeated my room had caused me to almost gag. I'll admit, I completely forgot about my potion after getting engrossed in my research last night, and now I was paying the price. It wasn't just a smell. My body had pushed out all the impurities that were inside. The black sludge-like substance was all over my bed sheets. There was no salvaging them. Quickly discarding all the bedstuffs, I made my way to the shower to finally get this stuff off of me. Only, as I looked in the mirror, I couldn't help my eyes widening. I don't remember the potion working this well. My muscles were much more defined than they should be. Not to say I'm overly muscular, but it should have taken me a few months to reach this level with hard work. How was this possible? The potion should have only been a small push towards the peak of human fitness. Oh, I seem to have made a mistake. I still think of myself as purely human, as I have for the past 18 years of my life. I'm a half-devil, a phantasmal species. Not only that, but I also use my own blood as an ingredient. It would have influenced the concoction. There shouldn't be any negative side effect, as the blood was from my own body, but the results speak for themselves. Did my minor shape-shifting ability intermingle with the magical aspect of the potion to give me the optimal body shape I was after? What an amateurish mistake. This isn't something I would have done in my previous life. Frankly, I'm embarrassed that I could overlook something so obvious. I could only sigh in resignation. I guess it can't be helped. As much as I look back on my previous life's experience, it's not me. I need to remember that I'm not as infallible as the me from before. I'm still very much a novice in almost every aspect. One step at a time, no need to rush through everything. I'll accumulate my own experience, while also drawing on my past life as a reference. We are different people. I don't need to behold myself to the standards of someone who lived an uncountable number of years. I've just been so busy that I haven't had time to truly contemplate my current mental state. My thoughts were all jumbled. I would need to take some time to sit down and figure everything out. Unfortunately, I'm on a rather tight schedule. My thoughts were interrupted as my stomach grumbled in agitation. I had completely forgotten to even eat a meal last night. I guess I'll have to make myself breakfast then. I'm oddly in the mood for something of the Western variety. Another thing I've inherited, I suppose. My other self didn't dislike Eastern food by any means, but he preferred his own country's cuisine. Not that I could blame him. Almost everyone is partial to their homeland's food. I didn't stop my practice even if I was doing something as mundane as cooking. As I searched the cabinets for what I need, I was turning off and on my circuits. It wasn't particularly difficult to open them fully last night before I went to sleep, having the experience from my previous life, but I still needed to be able to turn them on and off at a moment's notice. What to make? I guess I'll just have to settle on a couple of eggs and some toast. I don't have the stuff to really go all out. A thought occurs. I was already a big eater, like noticeably bigger than anyone I could think of. Was that a side effect of my devil heritage? I only thought of it now because of the fact that I was always a bit scrawny before. I should definitely have gained some weight with my eating habits. Minor shape-shifting ability bleeding through? Doesn't matter. I like eating, so why bother over the details? Bless dopamine. Fill the void in my heart with food. The sizzling of eggs on the skillet almost made my mouth water. Thankfully, my meal only took a few moments to prepare. Now, what else am I to do today? I contemplated my next move as took a very satisfying bite. Physically, my taste buds haven't changed, but my mind remembers certain things differently. It's making eating an interesting experience each time I try something for the first time since I've awoken. Going over my schedule, my calculations weren't completely done, but I had some confidence in at least a local portal if I needed to get away for a bit. It's funny considering that my kitchen looked like a child scribbled all over the walls. What to do? My combat ability isn't quite up to a level I'm comfortable with, but I also felt like I could run away from almost anything if I needed to. Worst case, I rip a portal to a random world if this one gets burned for me. No idea where or when I'll end up, but it's most likely better than death. I still feel a bit weak. Thought if only there was a way to get stronger, quickly. Oh, there is a way. The face of a certain pervert came to the forefront of my mind. Chapter 4. Finding where Issei Hayudu lived was easy enough. I saw him and his two friends running home together screaming about a porn game they were going to play. Just like me, the people on the street didn't even bat an eye at their behavior. I never had any meaningful interaction with him, especially with his reputation at school. Him and his two friends, whose names I couldn't care to remember, they were known as the perverted trio. They often did things like peeping on the kendo club changing clothes. Bold as hell on their part. Maybe the lack of true disciplinary action emboldened their efforts further? I really am curious how the two devil heiresses stopped any outsiders from meddling. I mean, it would only take one of the girls there to complain to the right person, their parent or something, for shit to hit the fan. A large portion of the school came from wealthy and powerful backgrounds. There was only so much mental manipulations could do before something slips through the cracks. But I digress. I think most people were well aware of this trio's tastes at this point. It's not that I'm a prude or anything. I'm a healthy young man, and like most my age, girls probably take up at least half my thoughts on average. I just don't go around shouting about my proclivities in public. It's not even that I have an issue with their tastes or dreams. Issei, for example, wants a harem. Good for him, I wish him all the luck. Hell, he isn't even objectively ugly. If anything, he would be in the upper percentile of looks. But the way he acts just makes people disgusted. Is there really a need to act like a creep? Maybe I'm just still a bit angry that he never gets in trouble or has to face the consequences of his actions. I can take a few guesses why everything was turning up for his benefit. No doubt the two devil heirs at the school had been either turning a blind eye or actively dissuading any form of punishment. Of course, potentially recruiting an idiot with a powerful dragon in his soul was more important. I briefly wondered how many pieces it would take to reincarnate Issei without his sacred gear. I didn't know how to feel about the whole system that devils use to reincarnate other species into their own. I've always been an advocate for humanity. Even if my previous life I stood on humanity's side against what went bump in the night. Literal chess pieces that turn other species into devils, aptly named evil pieces. It was comical to think about, only made funnier by the fact that they were a masterwork of magical engineering. A king in their peerage of chess pieces. My thoughts briefly drifted towards Sona, then to the other devil heir at the school. I never had any contact with her, not that I'm complaining. Rias Gremory, my aunt. I'm curious why she never bothered to even meet me. I guess she didn't want to get involved in whatever issues sprang up because of my presence. I can more or less understand the situation she was in. My existence was probably a sore point between several parties and involved some political fallout if things escalated. And if my perception of this world line was correct, she had her own worries to deal with. Now that I think about it, I think I caught some of her peerage watching me sometimes. Not that I knew about them previously, but hindsight and all that. I guess she was responsible for babysitting me, along with the Citri heiress. Speaking of babysitting, I noticed a small bat-like creature hiding under a corner of Issei's roof. I guess he's already being scouted. Do they know about his dragon? I could roughly guess that was one of their familiars. Well, first come, first serve. I held a hand on my sword for a moment before letting go. I decided against killing the familiar. It didn't have any combat power, and I'm not heartless. Reaching into my hat, I pulled out the stack of talismans. I only had a bit of knowledge, barely more than a novice, so I couldn't create but a few different types. Looking through the stack, I withdrew the one I wanted, and with quick toss, I supplied the required mana, and the paper glowed, flying towards the little creature. A simple binding, more like a paralysis. I don't know how this will affect something being fed a stream of magical energy from a devil. At best, I probably had only a few minutes before someone came to investigate. It may seem obvious to do something like this at night, but I would rather do it with witnesses, so to speak. Also, I don't think anyone will question some strange noises with these three in one room together. Oh gods, I hope they don't subscribe to the philosophy of giving each other a hand. Dude, right there, if you make your way through her route, you can unlock the harem ending. No way, I've done her route like 100 times. She always gets pissed and breaks up with me when I get more girls. You need to fill her H meter before the second act. That's impossible. I'll show you. You need to seduce her mom first. Why, you genius. Okay, a lot milder than I thought. To be honest, I thought they were going to have their backs together and wanking it. Well, I still don't want to stay in here any longer than I have to. I feel icky just thinking about what's happened in this room. They don't even notice me open the window. I guess one doesn't expect someone to enter through a second-story window. On a side note, wings are amazing. I thought about making a comment or grabbing their attention, but fuck it. I just threw 3 more talismans, sealing their movements. Of course they couldn't speak while paralyzed, and they just fell over, looking at me in confusion. I'm here for your porn. Yeah. I couldn't help it. The looks of utter horror had me inwardly cackling. All right, let's do this. I tapped the 2 mooks on the head, knocking them out with a small bit of hypnosis and slightly altering their perception. Despite what most people may think, hypnosis isn't some catch-all mind-altering. It's best used to confuse and lead the mind to making certain decisions or filling in blanks as opposed to controlling someone. They were going to wake up in a few minutes, thinking they fell back in their chairs and hit their heads. Now, though, I looked at Issei Hayadu. A part of me did feel a little bad about taking this from him. He could potentially awaken his power and go on to lead an interesting life. Though, that wasn't a 100% probability. Even I didn't know exactly how this world would turn out even after seeing the world line's probabilities. I basically knew how things would most likely play out, not anything with certainty, and that didn't consider my own interference. It was basically a complex form of modeling. My previous self had peered into this world's progression to predict future events. Even with this, I wasn't omnipotent or all-knowing by any means. My information may be faulty, or fate might be overturned, and events that could seem predetermined are possibly halted. On top of that, my past memories were a little vague. It's like I'm doing him a favor. I'd give it even odds that he would die in a few weeks without my help. Anyways, let's get started. I placed my hand on his chest. Even as he tried his best to squirm, I ignored him. I pulsed mana into his body and was immediately met with resistance. Even without awakening his power, he had certain passive traits that were starting to seep into his body. But it was no use. He had no idea what I was doing and couldn't fight me. I found what I was looking for after a few moments. A red gauntlet that was basically wrapped around his soul. Poking someone's soul was dangerous. I didn't want to kill him, I had more pride than that. But the more I looked at this, the more I didn't like what I saw. If I had to create a mental image, it's like someone took some wire and wrapped a red gauntlet all around his soul in an attempt to combine the two. I could only hope this was unintentional, and knowing some secrets of the world, I could guess that this wasn't as thorough as the system that distributed these powers was supposed to be. A certain side effect won the system not operating efficiently, perhaps? No wonder most hosts die when someone tries to extract such a thing. I'm sure they just yank away the outside power and the soul gets mutilated in response. Then again, when has anyone tried to nicely steal one of these things? They probably intentionally did the equivalent of a smash and grab. Whatever, I'm better than them. I started to unravel the wires that were binding the gauntlet to the pervert's soul. It wasn't difficult, just a bit tedious, and I had a lot of experience messing with people's souls. The previously me wasn't a psycho, but he also didn't have qualms about using any resources, such as idiots who try to mess with him in his research. Issei's body started to shine as I pulled the object and materialized it into the physical plane of existence. Beautiful. Well, I just quickly shoved it into my own chest. No point in pussyfooting around. Better skedaddle before any unwanted guests arrive. Well, Issei, let's make sure you have a good dream at least. I flicked his forehead and gave him something to distract him from a few gaps in his memories. He'll wake up fine in a few minutes. In fact, he'll probably be better than fine. I think this thing probably left behind a dragon aspect that would start to awaken. With a shrug, I started destroying any evidence, and removing my talismans, I quickly left the scene. Sneaking back home was a bit of rush. I didn't think anyone was following me, but it was fun to pretend regardless. I also felt my confidence soar after getting this little trinket. A sacred gear. An item of power created by the God from the Bible to give humanity a form of protection from the supernatural. They usually seal powerful entities inside, so the host can make use of their acolytes. Honestly, their strength was comparable to that of noble phantasms. They are part of a system that follows newly born souls and reincarnates with them. This one in particular, the boosted gear, it was one of several Longinus series, meaning they were potential god killers. A powerful item that could be devastating in the right hands. It housed the soul of Gotch, the Welsh dragon. Hello! I paused, hearing the foreign voice in my head. Hello! This is new. For me as well. I realized who the voice belonged to immediately. You got some interesting things in here. Thanks. I cleared my throat. So, I didn't expect you to wake up. Already thought I would have to do something about that later. Taking me out of my host was enough of a shock to wake me up prematurely. Ah, you saw that. I hope he isn't angry. I haven't decided yet. Oh, you can hear me. Of course you can. You're in my soul. Well, you are interesting. Though, I don't particularly like being stolen from my rightful host. That's understandable. But there was a good chance you would have been nicked by a fallen angel with abandonment issues if I hadn't come along. I could sense him doing the equivalent of narrowing his eyes. Do you think I didn't look through your memories? There was also a fairly high chance my host would have gone on to become someone powerful and even defeat my rival. A pay dragon. I countered. I could physically hear him wince. Touché. Do you dislike me as your host? I asked. I didn't really know his preferences. You wouldn't be the worst one I've had. The opposite, actually. You have a lot of potential. He conceded. After a few moments of silence, he spoke up again. I am curious about what you're going to do from here. If nothing else, your life will be a fun drama. I couldn't help but frown. I was about to retort, but he cut me off. Don't get all mopey on me, let me finish. Whatever you did, you jiggled me around enough that some restraints are a bit loosened. That doesn't sound good. All I got was a snort in response as he continued. I'm unsealed from my fake twice-critical state, but I can force myself back down to those restrictions. I'll give you a trial period. Well, this is going better than I was expecting. I'll take it. Okay, I can work with that. I felt a bit of reassurance. Even if I wasn't as strong as I would like right now, being able to double my abilities at a moment's notice was a huge boon. I'm going to sleep. You didn't awaken me correctly, so I'm still tired. Do something impressive and I'll undo the seals. I could feel him give me the shoe motion in my soul as his voice disappeared. Once a dragon, always a dragon, not much I could do about his attitude. The fact that he didn't just go "fuck you" and shut himself away was a big enough deal. Well, it still had more work to do, better get going. Chapter 5. I was a bit giddy at my newfound toy. The red gauntlet, my boosted gear, appeared on my arm. I flexed my muscles, wiggled my fingers, and made sure to go through the full range of motions to get an idea of how it would feel. I have to admit, this thing felt great. On the surface, it looked rather bulky, but it moved almost like a skin-tight glove. Its weight wasn't anything worth mentioning, yet I knew it was unbelievably durable. If nothing else, it would make a great shield. A part of me dearly wanted to test out its more esoteric abilities, but I was still keeping a low profile. I didn't know if throwing around dragon-based powers would draw any attention I didn't want. Once the initial excitement ran out, I did put it away back into my soul. A comforting feeling knowing that it would be hard for most people to disarm me. Hee hee. That was bad, and you should feel bad. Go to sleep, you stupid dragon. My joke was great. Anyways, I still had things I needed to take care of before I started doing anything of importance. I still haven't finished my calculations for my magic. Glancing at the walls filled up with my scribbles and formulas, I was thankful that most of this would only have to be done once. Sure, I would have to do some more calculations when I went to different world lines, but at that point I could basically cut and paste the majority of this to fit me needs. At least until I can overcome this problem with sufficient equipment. Still though, I just couldn't help but groan at the work I still needed done. It's not like I enjoyed sitting here for hours and hours doing math. I could still do some other stuff while I focused on my annoying formulas. I still had some leftover ink mixed with my blood. I could recycle it, so to speak. I withdrew my cane blade from my hat and once again reminded myself to find a better storage method. There wasn't much I could do with this thing. The materials of its crafting only made it slightly better than to use nothing as a magical foci. I could do a primitive method of soaking the weapon in my mana-infused blood. It would somewhat increase the competency of my casting through the sword. The ink actually came in handy here. I would need to make a note of this for the future. The method was a bit simple, if not stupid, but it was a good for an emergency, or if someone is severely lacking in resources. 10 tricks and tips for a stranded magus. Well, most competent magi knew the power of blood. It didn't have much staying power as other materials, but what it lacked in continued use and throughput, it made up for in availability and ease of application. I just made a makeshift container out of paper and tinfoil and let my blade soak for a few hours. There was the idea to maybe carve some more runes onto the weapon, but I scrapped that for now. I didn't feel the need to invest any more into something that was clearly temporary. Not just that, it already had been enchanted with an effect many years ago. There's no telling what reactions would occur if I tried to tamper with that. And finding another real weapon in this place was unlikely unless I venture into the more supernatural parts of the world. I looked at the time on my phone and saw it was getting late again. After another few moments of grumbling, I decided to get to work. I couldn't just procrastinate for the entire night. I lifted my head with a yawn, realizing I had fallen asleep on the table. I felt my back pop a few times as I stretched. Sleeping in such a position made me feel all stiff. My mind immediately traced where I left off last night in my calculations. With an exasperated sigh, I threw the nearby marker at the wall. Stupid math wasn't being cooperative. I hit a bit of a mental wall with my formulas, and I was starting to get aggravated. Maybe I just needed to get away from it for a while. I lost track of how many hours I had actually been working through it, probably about 14, when all was said and done. I wanted to make something for breakfast, but I remembered I didn't have much left and I haven't gone to the store in several days. I do have some shitty stuff like some quick microwave ramens for an emergency. The sound of someone knocking on my door drew my attention away from my cupboards. Who the devil could be knocking at my door so early in the morning? Shimoda-san, a familiar voice greeted me as I opened the door. I blink at her for a moment. No soliciting. I go to shut the door, but a foot catches it. I just sighed as I opened it again. What do you want, Shirtorai? I thought I would have a couple more days before I got bothered. Was I caught in the act yesterday, or is this just coincidence? You've been absent from school for several days now. I'm authorized by your guardian to check up on you in case of emergency. She explains. More babysitting duties. I should have expected this. Well, as you can see, I'm in perfect health. Goodbye. Take a hint. I was about to close the door again, but I felt something tingle at the back of my head. Did this bitch just try to fucking hypnotize me? Well, I was going to be nice. Shimoda-san, why haven't you been to class the past few days? She pushed up her glasses, staring at me expectantly. Call me skeptical, but I don't think she'll take a because. Fuck you as an answer. You've caught me. I've seemed to develop an odd ailment, and it makes it awkward to attend class. You see, whenever I see a girl with glasses, my pants just get really tight. I saw her eyes widen and her mouth slightly open. I guess this came out of left field for her. I've always been rather soft-spoken and mostly polite. I have decided to live the life of a hermit from now on. Goodbye, Shirtorai. I slammed the door and locked it. I snickered as I went for my stuff, not even bothering to give her my full attention as she apparently opened my door, even though it was locked. Oh my, breaking and entering, what would the rest of the school say? What's gotten into you, Shimoda? She eyed me with a bit of skepticism, and she dropped some of the formalities. What is all of this? She took a few steps inside and looked at my scribbles covering the walls. I have taken the drugs. I answered simply. I wonder how long until she puts 2 and 2 together, no matter it's time for me to bounce. Hey, Citri, want to see a magic trick? What are you? I reached into my hat and pulled out one of the pieces of jewelry in plain view. It was a shame I would have to waste this. It was a pretty nice little bracelet. Now for my next trick, I'm going to make an asshole devil disappear. I pulled on the kaleidoscope and pumped everything I could into one of the jewels encased in the bracelet. Specifically, a topaz, and while I wasn't as experienced at jewel craft like my previous self, I still retained enough knowledge to make certain minerals explosive at a whim. Shimoda! The devil heiress shouted as I tossed the trinket in her direction. It looked beautiful for a moment, its iridescent glow illuminating the house before the magical energies inside the jewel cracked the surface and spilled out, causing a reaction. BOM! I had reinforced my body a moment before and jumped behind the table. It wasn't a strong explosion, and it wouldn't harm Sona in any meaningful capacity, but I saw her body get blown out the door. The satisfaction of seeing her get the magical equivalent of a slap in the face. My ears were ringing slightly as I gathered everything else I needed, shakily moving towards a back wall where I had a single picture of me and my mother. With one last goodbye, I put the picture into my storage space and tossed a couple talismans into the kitchen. They ignited, starting a fire as all evidence of my magic started to be consumed. Magical fire burns hot and fast. It wouldn't last long. Time to leg it. I pulled on the kaleidoscope once more, having memorized all the calculations to this point. They weren't perfect, and there were some holes in my equations. But I had a good feeling. I was aiming for the world line my previous self came from. Let's see how close I get. The multicolored portal opened up before me, and I jumped in without hesitation.